Professor Dr. Nuha Ashab, PhD, University of Cambridge, has taught a number of academic institutions, including the University of Cambridge, the School of Oriental and African Studies in London, and International Studies Center. She has also taught and worked at the Institute of Ismaili Studies in London. Her main area of interests are Islamic, ethical, and political thought, classical Arabic literature and thought, ethics in Quranic exegesis, and the reception of the Quran in classical literary traditions. She is the author of a number of books and articles, including Ethics in Islam, Friendship in the Political Thought of al-Tawhidi and his contemporaries. Dr. Ashab?
Thank you very much for your generous introduction, and I would like to start by thanking the organizers for inviting me. I have to say this is my first conference after a long period of illness, so it's still, my research is still preliminary, and I hope that it can generate some good discussions. I would like also to say that my presentation, like my talk, is not going to be in German. It's going to be in English.
I'm sorry, in English.
Yeah. I wish I could one day present in German.
Yeah, why not? I'm sorry.
Fantastic. So my presentation is going to be on the notions of good and bad in Islamic ethics. And in this presentation, I would like to address the dynamic nature of ethical discussions in Islamic traditions, as well as their originality and the difficulty of approaching this ethics from a perspective that separates the reason from religion. I will start by introducing the notion of good and evil in Islamic religious and intellectual traditions. This notion carries various connotations, and discussions on good and evil are not just limited to discussions on human conduct or character traits. The elusive nature of these notions and their complexity are actually based on the fact that they are discussed in different realms of ethical traditions. For example, like if we look at Arabic literary and literary traditions and literary criticisms, we can always find words like qabih and hasan, ugly and beautiful. There are also these two concepts of good and evil also are discussed thoroughly in the Quran and in legal traditions, and in reference to words like haqq, truth, and falsehood, batil, etc. There are also discussions in legal traditions about the nature of an act. What is mamduh, what is praised, what is good, what is a good act in relation to communal practices or in public sphere, etc. And also like what is blamed, madmoom. And these discussions also include the treatment of also values and norms. They're also related to treatment of what is virtuous, what is not virtuous, what is the nature of virtue, etc., etc. So they are not to be limited to only one form of discussion, but they relate to so many, they take us in so many different directions. Also, for example, in philosophical discussions, good and evil are also associated with discussion on the nature of the soul, as well as metaphysical connotations related to existence, etc., etc. And we, when we look at discussion of evil and of good and evil, we also come across as notions of the ultimate good, al-khair al-mahad, or and what is the best form of action for humanity, etc., etc. So this association of good and evil to different different realms of ethics, obviously deserve a proper analysis and a proper examination. Not just in terms of the nature of these of good and evil, but also how norms are constructed in relation to scripture and communal practices that also lead us to discussion over agency and the human responsibility, concept of happiness in this world and the hereafter, and also the psychology of ethics and the role of the soul and especially the training of the soul in order for a person to reach perfection and to perform good actions in a social context. Discussion of the this is to say that discussions of the attributes that should exist in an action. I'm going to now to discuss what are the attributes that, or the discussion of attributes that should exist in an action in order to describe it good or virtuous, are also related to the cultivation of ethical behavior, which is also related to concept of the purification of the soul and the concept of moral refinement. Khair or good is defined in itself for the pleasure, benefit, or the happiness that results from it. This value judgment is determined on the basis of aesthetic or pragmatic experiences that a person obtains from doing certain types of acts that result in actions which provide pleasure or benefit for a person. It is defined in contrast to evil, and something that is desired by and something that is desired by everyone, since its ethical elements are objective attributes of the act and not conditioned by a situation. This is how in the context of philosophical schools the good is defined. For example, in the 4th century, like mainly Arabic philosophical traditions of the 4th century address the question of good and evil in reference, as I mentioned, to the nature of good and virtuous human acts, and in reference to the soul. And the most important aspect of their contribution to ethical discussion is the social thrust to their vision. In addition to their great interest in individual virtues, philosophers saw virtues as social, as essentially social. For example, Miskawayhi says, but virtues are not non-existences. They are actions and deeds which are manifested when one participates and lives with other people. He argues that virtues such as friendliness and cooperativeness are necessary to human well-being. Aesthetics are mistaken in seeking perfection outside society. Such men are neither temperate nor just. Indeed, they lack the social theater in which such virtues might develop. 4th century philosophers considered extensively humans to live in societies, and so social cooperation as essential for the good or for the existence of the good. And this desire for sociability, according to them, is the will of God for man, and therefore religious practices are designed to allow people to form a friendship and to achieve the goal, the ultimate good, or al-khair al-mahd. Humans are incapable of securing all their needs alone, and therefore the good exists in a social context. Human beings are capable of attaining happiness and perfection, but this requires also not only existing in a social context, but also training in moral qualities, which they define as khuluq, which is hal, a state proper to the soul. It seems that there is a link between psychology, between psychology and ethics, especially in the writing of Miskawayhi. For him to determine what man ought to do, one should determine what his nature actually is. The soul is the source for good and bad, and evil. And it is within this context that moral qualities are considered to be matters of the soul. The soul is made of 3 faculties, according to the Platonic division: the rational soul, al-natiqa, the irascible soul, al-ghadabiyya, and the appetitive soul, al-shahwaniyya. And moral qualities are divided according to these 3 faculties of the soul, since each of these faculties has its particular object of love, regardless of whether they are object of bad or evil. Common to the objects of love is also the desire for immorality, baqa, or of their specific activities. Thus, each part of the soul aspires to fulfill its desire, ignorant of its true interest in this world and the next. Tawhidi, also another scholar in the philosophical schools of Baghdad, says that the good is longing for a certain type of perfection. For him, the good is to long for a specific type of perfection, while the ultimate good, al-khair al-mahd, only happens when people are able to manage the contradicting desires of the soul and to control these contradicting desires. And all good emanates from the rational soul. This al-khair al-mahd emanates from the rational soul. And he further adds that for men to achieve the state of self-management, the rational soul, if pure, must control the other 2 souls. The good, the perfection of the true nature of man, and the purity of man's essence. Therefore, the rational soul, if pure from desires, longs to understand man and then to understand the universe. This must begin with knowledge of man himself, who is for al-Tawhidi al-alam al-saghir, the microcosm, while the universe is the macro-anthrop, al-insan al-kabir. Once this type of knowledge is achieved, knowledge of God, who is the cause of everything else, will be reached. This moral equality of the virtuous rational soul to immerse itself in the discovery of man and then the universe will enable man to determine the desires of the other 2 faculties of the soul, to restrain them, and then to reach the ultimate good with others in the same social context. The 1st century philosopher, the 4th century Christian philosopher Yahya bin Adi also shares similar views to those of al-Tawhidi and Miskawayhi. He argues that a person should make himself a rule, qanun, to restrict himself in response to evil, which can be achieved in response to the evil of the appetitive and irascible powers of his soul. And this way, a person reaches the state of good, which can be achieved only when the habits of the rational soul are promoted to empower itself, to embellish itself with virtues, refinement, and good deeds, and to put the most commendable of its operations into effect. This is what Yahya bin Adi calls a tool for self-management, a vehicle for practice. It is about training the soul to be virtuous by abandoning evil and making these desirable virtues habitual. Miskawayhi also discusses the responsibility of a person to refine his or her individual human nature. And in his Tahdhib, the refinement of moral character, he also provides rules for the preservation of morality, to acquire for ourselves a character by virtue of which actions cultivated from us are all good. The way to this end is to know the soul, its essence, the purpose of its existence and perfection. To reinforce his assertion, Miskawayhi quotes from Surah Al-Shams, by the soul and that which shaped it and inspired it to lewdness and piety. This verse acts as a testimonial, putting the weight of the divine words behind his own teaching and his own words. And it's very interesting here that, as I said, we cannot separate between these religious philosophical traditions and the other religious tradition by virtue of how much these scholars or these philosophers, when they argue for good and evil, they actually borrow from the Quran itself. And in their and based on their discussion, the soul becomes the source. The soul becomes the source of good and evil. And Miskawayhi introduces, similarly to Ibn Adi, the task of educating and purifying this soul as a religious duty and a way of fulfilling obedience towards God. This shows how religion is inseparable from this entire process. This mixture of theological moral speculation and the ethics of voluntarisms, in which good and evil or rightness or wrongness of an action depends on how it is willed, rather than actions per se as the fundamental targets of moral appraisal, and as such underlines the agency, the human agency and concept of responsibility. Discussion of good and evil, as I said in the beginning, they are also related to discussion of character traits, the word khulq, which many of these scholars, especially Tawhidi, related to the root khalq, kha la kaf, which is creation. And so it is, and by this they try to show how these character traits are actually an innate disposition, which cannot be changed completely, but it can be modified or refined through a process of moral refinement in order to control it. Human beings are made of different contradicting forces and situations, good and evil, serenity and fear, courage and cowardice, knowledge and ignorance. And the person who has a pure faculty of reflection should be able to use this faculty to determine the good or the beneficial and bring it out in order to avoid evil, the harmful. This can be reached by maintaining a balance and moderation between contradicting forces in a human being. The idea of moderation here reflects a Platonic understanding of virtue, which is conceived as a perfection made possible through moderation, الاعتدال. So for Miss Kawaihi, the good or the virtuous is the character of the soul, which disposes it to work with moderation and according to the dictates of reason. The qabih and the ugly, when Tawhidi discusses these concepts, he always associate them with discussion on moral judgments, which are normative, concerning rules and making people obey them. And they are also there to guide action. So for Tawhidi, he states that there are different types of moral equalities according to how they are judged morally. There are the praised and what is blamed, and that which has elements of both. According to him, actions can be divided according to their ethical values as either Hasan, which solicit praise, good, and Qabih, which solicit blame. This distinction between good and bad should be the result of a meticulous investigation in order to justly describe a moral character or an action as Qabih or Hasan, and not to mix between the two. There are many origins for the good and the evil. Sometimes these origins can be innate, طبيعي, and sometimes they are based on habits, عادة. Sometimes they arouse from passion or desire, shahwa, or they are dictated by and these can be also the good and the evil. They can also be described or determined by religious law, shara, or by the intellect, al-aql. Tawhidi also introduces a holistic approach in order to conduct a proper examination to determine that which is truthful from all of these sources and to reject what is not. Since the origin or the source of Hasan and Qabih can vary, then the standard for the moral evaluation of what is Hasan and what is Qabih is determined on the basis of examination regardless of their source of origin. They should not be taken as providential ideas or manifestation of divine authority. According to the Tawhidi, no action is intrinsically Hasan or Qabih, but everything is determined by circumstances. For example, al-kibr, arrogance, is Qabih and shameful at the outset, but it is Hasan in some situations according to the condition that necessitates it. These actions are given a moral judgment on account of a situation. The situation produces the properties of badness or goodness for the act. He also says that sawab, rightness, and al-khata, wrongness, are two temporal matters that occur in speech, actions, and matters of opinion. They are not mere natural disposition in themselves. These are given a moral evaluation on the basis of rational judgment. For something is said to be wrong, it is determined by reason, or it is acceptable. For something to be right, it should be acceptable by reason. What is interesting here as well is like the fact that he also says that these are not just, they cannot just be determined by reason, but they are also determined on the basis of the Quran and the Sunnah. And he goes on to speak about this in his letter in the classification of knowledge, which I will mention later. So in general, good and evil are intrinsically interlinked with matters of right and wrong, and they are manifested in many domains, but they are more prominent in human actions, as he describes. In al-Muqabasat, he also explains further the nature of the good by reporting Sagistani's distinction between al-Khayr al-Mahad, the ultimate or pure good, and al-Hasan, the good in which the value of its qualities is subject to a particular situation or perpetual experiences that results or an experience that results from engagement with the object in a specific situation. For him, al-Khayr al-Mahad is always Hasan, is always beautiful, but Hasan is not always but what is beautiful is not always the ultimate good. Ultimate good, in which the qualities of the good are inherent in the object or the act, is worth experiencing for its own sake in all situations, and therefore it is more inclusive and encompassing of other types of beautiful al-Hasan. Miskawayhi also discusses the purpose of good. According to him, the good is the intention of the existence. For a person to recognize the good, he or she presupposes the existence of a number of conditions: knowledge of the soul, having will and volition, having will and volition, irada, and clear intention and to fulfill the potential of man, namely the aspiration for the good. Evil matters are the matters that prevent one from fulfilling this potential or to achieve the good, and they might be due to laziness or lack of determination. This distinction between good and evil depends exclusively on God's arbitrary determination or will. The good is not subject to anything that could limit or condition its essence of being good. For Tawhidi, we can see that how for these philosophers, Tawhidi, Miskawayhi, Ibn Adi, the good has a social element and is determined by fulfilling the essence of a human nature, which is sociable and gregarious. The good does not exist outside the realm of the social, and therefore the social element is an intrinsic quality of the good. In his Risala fi Aqsam al-Ulum, letter on the classification of knowledge, Tawhidi provides a further opinion about moral judgment. This, especially when he discusses the concept of fiqh, jurisprudence, which according to at-Tawhid, which he describes as the best practical source, since it discusses what one should or should not do. And it is the best source concerning matters of commanding right, ma'ruf, and forbidding wrong. For him, this knowledge of fiqh is based obviously on the Quran as the origin of the science, of religious law, ilm al-sharia, and the Sunnah. And both the Quran and the Sunnah are unproblematic sources for knowledge of morality or moral judgment, according to at-Tawhidi. They both determine good and evil, and thus necessitate action and demand rules of behavior which appear to be based on practical considerations. At-Tawhidi also quotes different opinions by his various teachers, such as al-Marwarudi, and he also offers different opinions, but they all place a great importance that matters of good and evil should be subject to a thorough examination and investigation. Another point that is also important in the discussion of these philosophers of good and evil is the way in which they, especially at-Tawhidi, judge the normative value of the good by its link, on the basis of the link between knowledge and action. This point informs his judgment of what constitutes a moral or a pious action, what makes an action good. Moral knowledge is that which becomes perfect for him by the virtue of being put into action. العلم ما تتم فضيلته بالعمل. So for him, good is, whether it's in relation of action or virtue, is the fact that this knowledge or this understanding of the good should actually be linked or should actually be implemented. He joins the life of knowledge with the life of pious action in a realization, in relation that is an essential component of the good life. It is through the life of ilm that one achieves perfection and goals when it is combined with the life of senses and that of the righteous deed. Thus, the ground that makes something good is when moral knowledge concerning ilm is combined with action. The intellect supervises this combination between the ilm and between ilm and amal. Therefore, the sources for moral knowledge not only derives from a divine source, but also from rational sources. Reasoning aids people to distinguish between good and evil. For 4th century philosophers, including Ibn Adi, Tawhidi, and Miskawayhi, the rational soul is responsible for making moral judgments. The soul is able to achieve perfection from all vices and all bodily passions that prevent it from good actions through voluntary actions related to the faculty of reflection and discriminate. At-Tawhidi adds that the rational soul eliminates itself through moral knowledge that it deduces from the intellect or reason by which man finds his happiness and avoids suffering. In another place, he also underlines how God has granted humans the ability to distinguish between good and evil and to make an informed judgment that is through sense perception, hiss, and the intellect, aql, holding the efficiency of reason for moral judgment, and the second is through intuition, which is associated with al-badiha, which is associated with revelation. The first and the second path should allow a person to reach similar judgments, especially if they are used without prejudice. Quoting al-Sajistani, at-Tawhidi acknowledges the complementary relationship between revelation and reason. This position is in line with the general attitude of also another group or another philosopher of the same intellectual arena, the Brethren of Purity, who also acknowledge philosophical traditions and the dictates of reason, shara'it al-aql, as a path to moral knowledge while not excluding the role of religion. The people who adhere to both and maintain a firm hold of the message of revealed religion in scripture and the tradition of the prophet are the firmly rooted in knowledge. Al-Kharasikhuna fil ilm. And they also in their epistle on the رسالة في بيان الأخلاق في بيان اختلافات الأخلاق, they also elucidate and develop theoretical aspects of ethics and character formation, and then they also providing a form of what we can call a practical ethics based both on religious and intellectual or philosophical sources. Ibn Adi also affirms that the lover of the good should direct his attention to the study of the philosophical sciences. So we can see a clear tendency by these philosophers to combine both religious traditions and philosophical tradition in the study of the good or in determining the good, etc. Ibn Adi does not exclude also other forms of knowledge, and acknowledges that the soul can obtain knowledge of morality not only from reading books on morality, but also from sources of religious nature, accounts of ascetics, monks, pious people, etc. So we can see this sort of attempt to draw from various sources in order to determine what is good and what is bad. So for these philosophers, there is no conflict between adhering to revealed religion and following the command of reason as a basis for moral judgment. Revealed religion and reason are both responsible for regulating the morality and order of the community. Finally, one could conclude by saying that the ways in which the concept of good, khair, evil, are defined in these contexts reflect a concern for the application of moral values or principles. This seems to be guided by a spirit of action-guided ethics / practical ethics. This form of understanding of moral value or of the good attempts to bridge the gap between the individual and the community at large. Thus, discussions of these concepts are related to personal concerns which cannot be separated from engagement in the social dimension of society. In addition, the discussions of good and evil in Muslim traditions show that the line between theoretical and practical ethics can be unclear, since they not only focus on providing theoretical explanations of the nature of these concepts, but also analyze what one should do to achieve the good. The discussions also highlight a shift in the concern for the value of moral knowledge on the basis of also highlight a shift in the concern for the value of moral knowledge on the basis of its sources, revealed or non-revealed, to a form. So the main focus is not on the source of knowledge, whether it is revealed or not revealed, but actually on a form of applied ethics by linking knowledge with action and stressing the practical function of knowledge. In other words, they attempted to promote reason and action in opposition to passion and religious zeal. There is also stress on communal perfection and as the ultimate goal of good and evil. There also seems to be a concern for encouraging systems of ethics on the basis of the purification of the human soul that starts with the individual but also has a social aim, promoting the rational soul's desire and control over the two weaker faculties of the soul in order to restrain people from conducting evil as a way to the acquisition and the practice of moral, in the form of the acquisition and practice of moral qualities. This was not only an epistemological, so the discussion, these discussions of good and evil in these contexts were not only epistemological exercises, but they were attempts to foster a common interest in the good, leading to salvation among members of the community. And this is what one of the beauty or one of the main issues about the originality of Islamic ethics. Thank you for your attention.